Welcome to the Second Bite podcast, where we talk with top entrepreneurs and CEOs about creating valuable companies through creative transactions. Now, let's get started with the show.
Hello, my name is Todd Taskey, and I am the host of the Second Bite podcast, where we talk with entrepreneurs and CEOs about creating, building, and then ultimately selling valuable companies. And people seem to really like this podcast because we talk with non-famous entrepreneurs that have sold their company for 7 or 8 figures, and in most cases are still working towards a bigger second bite of the apple. And while you have probably never heard of any of my guests, including Emre Akkaş, my guest today, I think that you will appreciate the very difficult task that he has accomplished of building a company and selling it very successfully. And I was thrilled to be a part of that. So Emre, very happy to have you with us today.
Happy to be here, Todd. Thanks for inviting me to the podcast.
Excellent. Hey, so just a quick shout out to our sponsors. This episode is brought to you by Potomac Business Capital, where we help businesses in the lower middle market maximize the value of their companies by putting a unique twist on our M&A experience and help our clients with successful transactions that lead them to freedom and wealth and the ability to make a bigger impact in the world. We spent 15 years developing our strategies for M&A, and I am happy that Emre is here as one of the beneficiaries of that experience and success. If you'd like to learn more, you can go to potomacbusinesscapital.com. And if you want to reach out to me directly, feel free to do so. The address is Todd, T-O-D-D, at potomacbusinesscapital.com. Emre, again, super happy to have you. It was great to be a part of your successful transaction. If you will, maybe we can start by telling us a little bit about Globalme.
Yeah, I found Globalme in 2009, and at the time, we solely provided language services, in simple terms, essentially translation services to large enterprises. That was our clientele, Fortune 500 companies. We did their, in a way, you can think about it as a digital marketing agency in a language space. So we did international marketing campaigns, we did software translations, we did app localizations into different languages. And that's what we did for the first 5-6 years of the business. And then pivoted a little bit into the machine learning and AI space with building data sets for training machine learning algorithms, and eventually built a software platform to be able to create data sets and annotate them in a very efficient manner using crowdsourcing technology. And that was part of the value that we provided to our buyer during the transaction. And it took about 12 years altogether from the time that I incorporated the business to the day that we sold it to the acquirer.
Very good. And to give people a context, about how many people worked at Globalme?
About 70 full-time staff we had in the end. I mean, in the beginning, it was only me and my co-founder for the first 4 or 5 years. We had a bunch of freelancers, and then we have grown to 70 full-time staff and a bunch of freelancers and contractors around the world.
Excellent. You had a very successful transaction a few years ago. What was the most memorable part of that transaction for you? And what was the biggest lesson learned?
Oh, wow. So many very memorable things and so many lessons learned, for sure. I mean, one big lesson learned is probably that even though I have known this and read it in many business books, I should have started preparing for such an event much earlier than I actually did. I mean, things worked out great in the end, but if I started a little bit earlier, structured the company, structured everything around the potential exit down the road, it would have been probably even better. That's probably the biggest lesson learned.
And what would have been better on that, Emre? A better tax treatment, how would it have been better?
I mean, even the numbers could have been better. I got to learn also like obviously all the numbers and the adjustments and everything that you can apply to those numbers with better planning and better structuring could be at a better place. And when you have multipliers, every little bit makes a big difference. So it could have had a direct impact into the valuation of the company.
And so you said there was many lessons. Are there anything else that jumps out?
Yeah, one thing that I'm happy that we did, and that's a lesson now I share with my other entrepreneur friends when they ask me, is to keeping the terms, the lockdown period of staying with the new company as short as possible. Not that you may want to stay with the new company, and that's all good, but having that flexibility and not having a lock period of like 3 years, 4 years, or like really long periods is never a good thing, because it really limits your flexibility and your negotiation power. So we did that really well in our transaction, so it wasn't really an issue. But whoever I talk to now, I make sure that I give that advice. Also, another one that I give to everyone that I speak with, and I got this advice at the time from others too, trying to minimize the earnout amount, because as much as you think you may be in control, you really aren't in control.
Yes.
Whatever terms you put in that SPA, at the end of the day, it's somebody else's company as soon as you sign. Again, like I was able to get my full earnout, no issues, but it wasn't without any glitches. So it's important to keep that to a minimum.
I'm going to drill down into that in just a second, Emre, but to put it in context, a lot of our other guests have rolled forward equity. They wanted to become part of something larger with a hope of a much bigger exit. For you, the objective was a little bit different. Can you talk about that?
I mean, I did roll over a little bit too, but not a large amount. So for me, I mean, when we were first getting into looking into how we're going to scale the company and what we're going to do about it, we did look at a bunch of different options, whether that's selling part of the company or getting investment from the outside to help us scale. But in the end, the transaction that made the most sense was the full acquisition from an acquirer. And then I had the option to roll over, but I didn't. Let me redo that. So we had the option to roll over, but I wanted to minimize that, especially because I would lose basically all the control. And yes, I'm investing into the new company, but that's no different than investing in any other company. And in the case of a private company, that investment can take many years to realize, and it may never realize. So I decided to keep that to a minimum. And that became part of our negotiation strategy during the transaction too, and rolled over just a little bit. And I wanted to essentially, if I am to sell the entire company that I built, I would rather sell it and then move on to the next thing rather than leaving it and staying. And in the beginning, I did consider staying and becoming part of the management, but things worked out in a way that I didn't see myself adding a lot of value to the larger organization, so I decided to move on.
So, the title of the podcast is Second Bite, because so many entrepreneurs, particularly at your age and at the stage of your company, are thinking about what's next? How do we evolve? How do we grow? Those type of things. And a little bit different, at least from my perspective, when we got started, you had a pretty strong sense that there were other things that you wanted to get to in your life, both professionally with a very young family, personally with a very young family, and professionally with other ideas that you had kind of rambling around in your head. So that kind of shifted our focus to more of a cash at close, how much we could grab in an earn out, and then a little bit of equity roll forward. So I have kind of two questions that buried in there. And the first one is, because you had already mentioned it, what did you learn kind of going through the process about an earn out? And as you said, kind of how to structure it. We did a couple of things I think that were very beneficial to you so that you would never get zero out of your earnout, and it was a high likelihood you would do quite well with it. Talk about that, if you will.
I mean, we did have pretty aggressive targets for getting the earnout. It was a sizable earnout still. Did whatever we could in the SPA to retain control of certain items, but at the end of the day, you can only have so much control because the budget is now getting approved by a different entity. There are other people involved in the process, so it wasn't without the glitches. And then COVID happened, and when COVID happened, a mandate from the global organization came that we had to cut budget, and I still need to deliver on my top line. So it did become a bit of a challenge. Fortunately, it was a really successful year for the company, so we didn't really have any issues hitting the targets, but could have easily gone the other way. So that's I came to that realization. Again, luckily, didn't end up being that way, but you never know what happens. A black swan event can happen. Other things that are outside of your control can happen. So it's probably the best to minimize the earnout, especially if it's going to be based on a number. If it's the time-based earnout that it's, once you hit the time, you get it anyway, then maybe it's not as big of an issue. But even then, I've also heard a lot of stories about, the environment becoming very challenging to stick around. Mine wasn't bad, so that was okay. But at the end of the day, it's somebody else's company, and now you operate in somebody else's company, and things are very, very different. Much more different than I thought it was going to be. Some in a good way, some in a bad way, but definitely very different. I did have intentions. Yeah.
I'm sorry, Emre, if it wasn't for COVID, do you think it still would have been that different? Do you think there's always that honeymoon period that no matter what they tell you a little bit afterwards, it's going to be different?
I think it always will be different. Granted, it probably has a lot of different variables. Our acquirer wasn't a really large company. If it was a really large company, maybe things would have been a little bit, less drastic in a way, because when the acquirer is not that large, then obviously their ways of doing stuff show up really quickly in your business. I had friends who had sold to public, really large companies, and for them it took years before anything changed in their company because the integration period was much longer. Our integration period was really quick. We wanted to be fully integrated with all the software stack and everything within a year, and that was part of my mandate. So things changed quite quickly. And, our acquirer was from a different geography, so there were cultural differences that also played into it. So many different things.
Yeah, and let me pick back up on one theme. You had talked about being prepared in advance or more prepared, which I think everybody wishes that they were more prepared, but they still want to take advantage of opportunities that come, right? So my question to you is, to use examples. Let's assume you're around $1 million of EBITDA. This I find is a very common internal struggle. You're at about $1 million of EBITDA. Why not grow the business to $2 million of EBITDA? Hope that we don't get bypassed by technology. Your business was a tech-heavy business, right? Dependent on the things that you were developing. There's a lot of competitors in the space. There's a lot of other stuff going on. Maybe you could just comment on how you now, from your perspective, think about the idea of selling a business at about $1 million of EBITDA versus maybe taking 2 or 3 or 4 years to get it to be larger, get it to a couple million, polish it up a bunch, and then try to do something.
Yeah, totally. And certainly it wouldn't have been a bad idea to do it that way either. For me, as we were closing to a number that I thought we had some inbound interest, which triggered the entire process. And we were getting to some numbers where I thought there could be an attractive offer. And again, I looked at many different options because it was time for us to scale. Are we going to get investment to do it? Are we going to get VC funding to do it? Are we going to get acquired to get to places that we wanted to be? So we wanted to consider all the options. And you can definitely get to larger numbers, but there is no guarantee that you are going to. And COVID, I think, showed to a lot of businesses that anything can happen very quickly. And yes, your EBITDA may double. You may be on the Zoom side of things, or you may be on the other side of things, and your EBITDA can tank. So, I mean, looking back now, it's also easy to say, and again, we had a fantastic year after the close. So it would have been, even for us, like if we didn't do a transaction the year after, things would have been better than what we signed, but you never know. So I'm actually quite happy that, you know, at the time that we made a decision, the multiplier that we got, I think was a good multiplier.
Yeah.
And I also am happy that things went well the next year. So A, I got my full earnout. B, I left the organization on a high note, right? So things were really going well, because it's easy to think that things are always going to get better when you're at the right track, but how long are you going to be able to stay on the right track? And it's not always in your control to stay on the right track. So I think it depends on everybody, and also taking some chips off the table. If you're able to do that, sometimes that could be like portions of the business, like you're saying, rolling over the equity might be a good way to do it.
And then to paint the picture for people listening, you went through your earnout, which was about a year. It was structured that you had the option to stay or the option to leave. My guess is if the buyer would have had their preference, it would have been for you to continue to stay. And for whatever the reasons are, you just decided there's other opportunities and different things I want to do, as opposed to becoming a long-term executive in this new company.
Well, I think both sides saw it that way. And I had that conversation. I had a good relationship with the CEO of the new company. I didn't see a position in the organization that I would be adding value, and I would be excited to continue. So I did what I needed to do, spent a lot of time on integration, both my staff and my clients, making sure that the succession plan was in place, and that worked out really, really well, which I'm very happy about. But after that was done, I didn't see myself adding a lot of value to the new organization. I decided to move on and do something else.
And we worked out in your documents that you, even though you're no longer employed by the company, you still have your investment in the company.
Yeah. I'm just a shareholder of the new company.
Yeah. And if you think back, Emre, it's a couple of years ago now, but when we started the process together, what were your biggest concerns? So to paint the picture, you were looking for a transaction, you wanted to find a place where you could plug in. There was some consolidation starting and some movement starting in the translation and localization business. And so we were going to start to do a broader outreach. And with that being your first real big transaction, there's a lot of conceptions, misconceptions, concerns, fears, all that. Can you remember any of those?
Yeah, I mean, numbers are obviously always a concern. Am I going to get a fair value? How am I going to make sure that I'm going to be getting? Because it's really hard to benchmark. Yes, you have some public numbers, and then you have other transactions, but you don't always get access to how they were valued. And each business is different, especially in the small business space. They are very different. So numbers are a big concern. Support is a huge concern. I also got to learn this through the transaction, but buyers are obviously a lot more experienced than sellers. So they have done many transactions in the past, so they know the process really, really well. But sellers, not so much, especially in the small business space. The support there through the broker and the investment banker is also a big concern for many entrepreneurs, and it was for me as well. Those two probably were the biggest, and the impact on business, right? Throughout
as you went through the process.
Yeah, throughout this is a very intensive process, as you also know. Am I going to be able to do what I'm already doing? I mean, all entrepreneurs and small business CEOs already have a 6 to 7 hour work week. Where do I squeeze everything else that I need to do to get through the transactions? That was also another concern.
I hear from a lot of entrepreneurs that they're worried that people will find out, or their competitors will find out, or their employees will find out. What was your level of concern there, and how did you manage that?
I was slightly concerned. I think I did have that concern too, and I shared it with you in the very beginning. you did tell me some things that gave me some comfort. I cannot remember exactly what those were now, but now looking back, and I also remember that we excluded a few potential buyers from our list when we were going to do the outreach, because I didn't want those companies to know that we were going through the process for many different reasons. But otherwise, looking back now, I don't think, it may even be a good thing, because you go through the process, even if you didn't do it, you're going through it because you're looking, you have a successful business and you're looking for different opportunities. And all companies do this. Like larger companies also do it all the time. They go buy other companies or they sell to different private equity firms. It's part of business. So I don't think there's much to be concerned about there, as long as you, do the proper documentation and the NDAs and all of that, and also pick the people that you're going to be reaching out carefully, and don't share any information that you don't want to share. And I think we did quite well there too. Like, just give them enough to make them curious, but not too much that was going to make it a concern for the management of the company.
Yeah. So when we were marketing your company, right, we had a deck that we were comfortable with. We had a pretty broad list. We'd crossed off the ones you either didn't want to know or you would never go work with or be partners with, right?
Right.
And then we started doing the outreach. What surprised you most, or what were the biggest takeaways or things that you learned in conversation with potential buyers and just going through that whole process?
Yeah, that you need somebody to, I'm glad that I didn't try to do it myself. Like, that's for sure a big one. Again, not with A, lacking the experience, B, you do want someone to be in between two parties. Will sound like a bit of a promotion for you here, but I'm glad that I have you in between, because you don't want to be the one directly negotiating. So you keep some of the powers to yourselves, and sometimes somebody needs to be, a little bit more straightforward with certain things, so you can separate the communication there. I think that plays very powerfully.
And you know, just if you could, Emre, because one of the things I think that you and I did really well, and that we often try to do, is exactly what you said, right? Is I take one message, you take another. Maybe there's some intentional confusion so that we can learn what those guys know and how they're trying to do things. Do you remember any specific incidents where that was helpful?
I don't know that if I remember any specific incidents, but it is very powerful to not be alone in this journey, for sure. Like, if for nothing else, not to be alone in the journey. And B, it's serious business, right? You negotiate a very big deal for both parties. Like, everybody wants to get the best deal out of it. And somebody in between who knows this process, who's not emotionally involved in the company. Like, as entrepreneurs, of course there are numbers, but there's also a lot of emotions involved in the process. The company is a big deal for many entrepreneurs, that the company that they found. So having a person who can keep the process to the process and making sure that things move on when they need to move on, and provide advisory, is critical. And in many cases, I might be interpreting, like you said, I might have been interpreting something based a little bit more emotionally, and maybe you brought me to more the rational side of things. It could be other way around. So I think that building the support and relationship between the parties is critically important for the success of the transaction.
Yeah, and it was emotional. And if you remember, at one point, we had an offer, a verbal offer from a group that was a great fit. It was a great offer. And we had been back and forth with them a few times. And then they owed us an LOI that was due on whatever it was, Wednesday or Thursday. And then that day he called me and said, you know what, we're going to do a different transaction, not in this space, with a different company. And we're just kind of a little, right. And then we were like, So fortunately, our process, we had 2 or 3 interested parties.
Right.
And I don't know how much of this you remember, but I remember going back to who the ultimate acquirer was and letting them know they had a unique opportunity because there was a window of time before we went back around to the entire group if they wanted to be aggressive with their offer. And in fact, we were able to improve a couple of things and find a very good home for the business.
Yeah, exactly. And, those conversations would be, even though, like, let's say I had the experience, would be hard to have directly. So I think that's why having an investment banker in between who just focuses on the process is very important to make sure that those little, like, if you miss one deal, there's another deal lined up. So that was the case for us, for sure.
And so then we sign an LOI, and then we go through due diligence, we go through quality of earnings, we negotiate your documents, negotiate your employment agreement, your separation agreement, all those things.
Yeah.
Was there anything in that? Were you surprised by the level of complexity with that? And was there anything in that group there that surprised you, or that you wish you would have learned going into it that was that was important?
I can't say that I was surprised with the complexity. I mean, many people had told me how complicated it was going to be. And it was at least as complicated as they told that it was going to be, and time consuming. But nothing surprised me there as far as the documentation is concerned. But one thing that is important also with legal party too, that you want to make sure that there is a legal party alongside with the investment banker that you
a lawyer,
a lawyer that you have good relationships with, preferably existing relationships, because again, like, things can get pretty intense. You want to be able to pick up the call and talk everything in detail and quite transparently and frankly. So that was important. I'm glad I did have that relationship, and that helped a lot. And a lot of agreements that needs to be read. We did have a bit of a glitch in the wording that caused a bit of a headache.
Of course, right near the end. Yes.
How things were interpreted. Yeah, right before the closing. Ended up resolving it, but gave us a bit of a headache. So you want to make sure that you also read everything yourself. You're still the person that knows your business the best. So can't just outsource all of those tasks. Need to have the support, both from the investment banker side and the lawyer side and the accounting and tax. But at the end of the day, the entrepreneur still needs to be the one who makes sure that all the pieces come together and the transaction closes successfully.
Yeah. And then you had in your transaction, and the negotiation, you get some things better than other things, and that's what negotiation is. But there was a couple of important things in your earnout, particularly around the language and the accounting of that came back to be really helpful for you at the end. Can you comment on that?
Yeah, I mean, we initially negotiated a longer earnout period, and then certain things changed throughout the transaction, and then we accelerated some of the earnouts, and we were able to negotiate that in to the SPA, essentially, hitting numbers faster and getting the earnout faster.
So if your performance accelerated, you would get credit for that earlier, and then you would be released from your employment earlier at your option.
Yeah, the employment. Yeah, exactly. So accelerating the whole thing. If I deliver faster, I get my earnout faster. That's really what we negotiated.
And we're running near the end of our time, so just a couple last thoughts. For somebody that is considering this process and they want to sell their company, or they want to become part of something larger, what are the top, say, 2 things or maybe 3 things from an advice standpoint that you would share that you think are critical, having successfully gone through the process?
Start talking to people. I mean, if you already have this in mind, don't avoid it. Don't say, oh, it's too early for me. Let me think about this a little bit later. Start talking to people now. Start building that network now, both with the person who's going to support you during the transaction, like the investment banker. You really want to connect and click with that person, so you will need to talk to a lot of people anyway. So start talking to them, start understanding the space, there are really good, books and blogs around this topic. So start reading them and start preparing your business. Even if you think it's too early now, I know now that it's never too early. Like the next business that I'm going to be building is going to be with the exit in mind from day one. That's how a business needs to be built. I mean, obviously, you can only learn this by going through it.
Right.
Even though, again, like I read this in many business books, and now I know that that's how you need to do it, because certain things would get to fruition a lot faster that way. So it's never too early. I think that's the core message here, is that if you already had the thought that, oh, am I going to exit one day? Today is the day to start working on that exit.
Good advice. And then, so let's end with this. You're, by many measures, very successful, right? You got a successful young family.
Thank you.
You've had one successful exit already at a young age. I'm sure you'll be on to other big and important things. Is there someone and or some book that you think has been particularly impactful in your journey that you could recommend, or a person that you should thank or shout out to?
I certainly thank you for supporting me in this process. I read many books, many different people helped me throughout this. I had a CEO coach, John, that also supported me in this. So a shout out to John, definitely.
Hey, so let's shout out to John then. John who?
John Dyack.
And just spell that. I'm sorry, Emre.
Yeah, John, last name is Dyack.
Excellent. And then give me, does one book come to mind that you thought was particularly impactful?
Yeah, I do have one book, and it's called $1 Million Consulting Proposals. It's by Alan Weiss. The book, the interesting thing about this book is that, I did write proposals and all of that, but there were many different messages in this book that made me think about my business very differently and how I present it to the others. And I think that helped us get into a lot of large enterprise business early on. So definitely recommend it, especially if you are in a service kind of business.
Yeah, and I will say, as a small business, sub 10 million of revenue, you had, I don't know, what is it, global 50 clients. So that book certainly must have had some impact for you. And I'm sure John's coaching along the way was helpful. Yeah, and I will say, Emre, it was, all of the projects we go on are long journeys. It was fun going through it with you together. I'm glad that it turned out as well as it did. I'm super excited to see what the next iteration will be after you spend a little time with your family and figure out what's going to be next. I appreciate you spending time and sharing as openly as you have. And I'll thank you for being on our on this episode of Second Bite.
Same here. Thanks for inviting me to the podcast.
Excellent. Emre, thank you so much.
Thanks, Todd.
Thanks for listening to the Second Bite podcast. We'll see you again next time, and be sure to click subscribe to get future episodes.